Well, hello there. How is everyone? I hope you're all well on this fantastic Friday. And this is video 2 of 2. You're looking absolutely amazing, by the way. And we're going to get straight into the meat and potatoes as it's Friday. And don't we all have like half day on a Friday? Are we allowed to have half day on a Friday? Shall we have half day? Let's have half day, shall we? So let's get straight into the meat and potatoes as I bring your attention once again to Heather Fitzgerald. As I saw a post and I thought, do you know what? More people need to see this and more people need to take this into consideration because it's right. It's right. And we're going to touch on something else when we've just read it. But look, the only story that has never changed since 30th of December 2022 is Bryan Kohbergers' story. Everyone else's story has ranged from one end of the spectrum to the other, easily a handful of stories attached to each issue. Imagine if Bryan Kohberger had 13 different stories about the 13th of November 2022. Truth does not change. Bryan Kohberger did not stalk the victims or the witnesses on social media. So let's just touch on that. We know in the PCA, it was suggested that Bryan Kohberger was a stalker. The prosecution, law enforcement, the reason really that it was given that Bryan Kohberger needed to be arrested in this crime and charged for the murders was that he was frequenting the area. He was stalking them. He was caught on a cell tower, and it put him in the vicinity of this property multiple times. And then what happened? Later on down the line, it was then had to be deemed that this was untrue. It was false. It was fake. It was bollocks. He wasn't a stalker. He hadn't been caught on a tower that serviced the property, but in fact, he was on a tower that didn't service the property. It all, in fact, fell short by somewhat 100 meters. It's important, that. Very important, that. So not caught near the property. In fact, that could, in a different world, be used as evidence to prove that he was never at the property because he was on a tower that would actually restrict him from getting to the property. Bryan Kohberger did not stalk 1122 King Road home. Again, that's all intertwined in this stalking the victims. Bryan Kohberger did not surveil the victims, witnesses, or the 1122 King Road home. Again, all entwined in these. The data on his phone absolutely proves that he wasn't over there. And why is that statement important? Because his phone data is being hidden. It's being held back. It's not being brought forward. In fact, there's claims that it just doesn't exist, despite having a dragnet of 3,800 plus phones in the area. Why does Bryan Kohberger's not exist? I'll tell you why, because they will never bring forward evidence that goes against the narrative that they are trying to push. We have search warrant requests, but we don't have anything back off of those two. And Taylor is still waiting to this day for the search warrant returns. Ray coming forward and saying about the phone data and the various statements that he has made, that the guilters are, very, very happy to say that he's someone that shouldn't be listened to. They'd be listening to him if he was on the state side. We know that because people have in multiple cases. Stephen Hitler calling him a conspiracy theorist while simultaneously ignoring the claims that have been made. And to this day, there has been no repercussions for the extremely serious accusations that Ray has raised. What else we got? 23 previous connections are to a cell tower that stops short of servicing 1122 King Road. It stops about 100 meters short of providing cellular service to 1122 King Road. And then we've got these various things here. Bryan Kohberger, no connection. no connection, did not stalk. The claims that he was stalking were deemed false. All of these things are so important because we have brought into question Ann Taylor, the ability that Ann Taylor has to protect Bryan Kohberger from potentially losing his life. But this is what Ann Taylor has been dealing with. Prosecution is a prosecution. They've got the evidence or lack of evidence, whatever they've got, and they just keep doing the same thing, and that is withholding. While Ann Taylor is requesting, and then we get to a point where that request hits either a stone wall, so she can't go any further, or she gets a barrage of stuff that she then has to deal with because it's handed to her in such a way that what she's looking for is buried and she can't find it. And yet that's her fault. She constantly then has to be blamed for delays, and you have a specialist come in and deems that this is unfair. There's bias in the community, so it gets moved. But that's again Ann Taylor's fault. That's her fault. We then fast forward to where we are now, and Ann Taylor says, "I'm not ready. I'm not ready to go to trial." Because these things keep changing all the time. From the very, very start, the story is constantly changing. And every time the story changes, I have to change. I have to adapt. I have to look into different things. I have to find out why it's changed. Why have you done this? Why has that happened? But that's her fault. It's always pushed onto her. She's the person who's just throwing everything at the wall and seeing how much of it sticks. When in actuality, wasn't it the prosecution who threw everything at the wall and saw how much of it stuck? The stalking that never happened. The cell phone that was nothing more than a fugazi. Because we know that they claim that they don't have his phone data. So if they don't have his phone data, then how can they tell you where he was? They believe that the absence of evidence can be used as evidence, while simultaneously you have specialists who say that's all fair and well, but we know that the data does actually exist. Bryan Kohberger himself always knew that data existed. He was the very first person who would say that this is the data that will prove that I did not do this and I will be exonerated. Yet that has remained consistently the hidden item in all of this. But the truth doesn't change. Truths never change. The only thing that changes over time is falsities, are lies. And like Heather asked there, what would you be thinking right now if it was in fact Bryan Kohberger's story and Ann Taylor's story that had changed and had to be adapted, and things had come out to prove that certain specific pieces of it were in fact completely wrong or different, like Xana's door, for instance, going from closed to open? What if that was Bryan Kohberger? What would you be thinking then? Would you still have the same confidence? Let me know down below. Love you all, and I'll catch you all tomorrow.